I was visiting my family for the holidays last year. They live 15 hours away, and I usually try to tough it out in one long drive. But this year, snow had come early and made driving a lot slower. So I was prepared to stop at a hotel somewhere along the way. I didn't book anything in advance since I didn't know how far I'd get before wanting to stop. I was just going to pull into wherever and see if they had a room available. When I left, it was barely snowing, but the further out I got, the more snow seemed to be coming down. Roads were still clear, but everyone was definitely driving more slowly and carefully. Around 8 hours into the drive, I still hadn't made it halfway there. I was getting frustrated as it was already 9 p.m. and it was just taking so long. I should have been over halfway there at this point, but now I felt like I had to keep going so that my drive tomorrow wouldn't be even longer. The snow had let up a little bit, but it still had accumulated on the road because there were no plowed trucks. I drove as long as I could, making it to 12 a.m. before deciding I'd had enough and needed some sleep. I pulled off the next exit and into a small motel parking lot. It was a long one-story building with 10 or so rooms. As expected, it wasn't the nicest looking place. The outside looked really old, and even the lights on the sign were dim and half burnt out. I parked in a random place near the rooms and got out, walking up to the main entrance. Inside, it was a very small room with a front desk, but there was a sign propped up on the counter. It said, "Be back in 15" with a little picture of a coffee cup on it. The chances of me arriving while the worker was taking their break just showed my lack of luck on this drive. I walked out and back to my car, but this time when I looked around the parking lot, I noticed something that I hadn't before. It was completely empty. I stood there in the cold and looked for a minute and didn't see a single car, and from the looks of it, it didn't look like any cars had even been in the parking lot tonight. I got back in my car and turned on the heat to warm up while I waited. Seeing no cars and nobody at the desk had me second-guessing whether the sign was actually for someone taking a break. There were no places within 15 minutes anyway, so I don't know where they could have driven off to if they were taking a break. I sat back and tried to think of what to do next, but my eyes and head were so tired, and I ended up passing out in my seat. When I woke up, a few hours must have passed. The snow had started pouring down again, and the wind was making my car sway. I sat up and looked toward the front entrance of the motel, but immediately made eye contact with a man peering in through my window. I jolted back as he stepped away and yelled something toward the parking lot. I looked behind him, seeing a truck on the other side. Another man got out of the driver's side and started walking up. The one by me then walked around my car, trying all the door handles. I snapped out of it and put my car in reverse, trying to back out before the wheels spun under me. Now the men were moving quicker, one yelling at the other to come over to his side and break the back window. I continued moving my car back and forth, trying to get through the thick patch of snow. But the sudden shattering of the back window only made it harder. I was trying everything now, as one of the men was reaching in for the door handle. Just when he put half of his body through the window and opened the door, I finally got traction and spun the car around. The man fell out, and the other tried to get in his truck to follow me as I turned the car and made my way out of the parking lot. Once I was back on the road though, they stopped following me. Although I don't feel like it was entirely my fault, I definitely should not have let myself fall asleep in that parking lot, especially in the middle of nowhere like that. What those men had planned could have been anything. They were obviously prepared though, and it almost seemed like they knew that this motel parking lot was an easy place to target people. But whatever it was, I'll probably never know. My family and I would go up north to go ice fishing when I was younger. My parents had friends that owned some cabins in pretty much the middle of nowhere. There was a small gas station about a mile away, but after that, it would take about 20 to 30 minutes to see anything else. On our way up, snow was starting to fall, and I just wanted to get settled in and play some games. It was an 8-hour drive to get where we were going, and it would be around 4 p.m. when we finally arrived. It was January, so the sun was starting to set already, and I was pretty tired. We pulled into our cabin's parking lot and started to unload. The cabins had smart locks, so all you had to do was get the code and enter it in, then it would give you the key to unlock the door. I grabbed my backpack and suitcase and went to enter the code, but I noticed there were already tracks leading up to the door. I told my dad, and he said it was probably the cleaning person or something. I took his word for it and went to open the door. Walking inside, I saw a bit of water on the floor. Again, I assumed it was from the cleaning lady. Other than that though, it looked fine and just how I remembered. I went to my room that I always stay in, and I started to unpack, but when I went to close the blinds on the window, I saw tracks again. It looked like they were coming from the woods and up towards our house, and judging by the snowfall, they had to be fresh. I told my dad, and he said he would check it out. By the time we got everything unloaded though, the snowfall had gone from sprinkling to almost blizzard-like. My dad said if anyone was out there, they're definitely not anymore, if they're smart. He made spaghettis for me and my mom, and we watched a movie. Then I went off to bed. I was awoken a few hours later to a thumping on the wall, and it sounded like it was coming from outside my window. I tried to go back to sleep, but it happened a few more times, and at this point, I wasn't even scared, but more annoyed really. I got up and checked outside the window and saw nothing. The snow had let up a bit, so it was easier to see. I noticed the tracks again though, almost in the same place they were the first time, coming from the woods. I made sure the windows were locked before going back to bed, as I couldn't really do anything about it anyways. The next day I told my dad, and he seemed skeptical. We went out there together, and sure enough, there were human footsteps leading from the woods to our cabin, right up to my bedroom window, then to the front door, and then back to the woods. We've been here before, and we know that besides the cabin, there is nothing for miles, and no one ever really camps in the woods, especially during winter. My dad called up his friends and told them about it, but still, no one could really do anything. After a few hours though, they brought over some mini cameras that you plug into the wall, and then you could see a live feed of your home. We set them up inside to make us feel safer. It was a hassle, but better safe than sorry. We left for the lake a few hours later, with my mom constantly checking the cameras and making sure nobody else was inside the cabin. When we arrived at the spot, we all left our phones in the car while we fished for some time. When we got back to the car though, my mom had a ton of notifications about the camera sensing movement. My dad immediately called his friend to go check the cabin or call the police. His friend stayed on the line while he went inside the house with some type of gun. After a few minutes of silence, he said nothing was there. I know he should have waited for the police, but my dad's friends are just a different breed. He called the police anyway and explained the situation. We didn't get any video proof though, because the cheap cameras only showed live feed and didn't actually save footage. We stayed with my dad's friend the next few nights, but kept the camera up in the cabin. Sure enough, on the day we were leaving, it sensed movement again. My dad and his friend rushed over there, but again, nothing was inside, but this time there were tracks leading from the woods to the cabin, the same tracks I saw on the first and second day. My dad thought about following the tracks, but my mom urged him not to. It's a bit eerie to think that someone could have been inside while we were sleeping or watching us from the windows during the day. Nothing ever came of it though, thank God, but it was still one of the creepiest experiences in my life. The next few times we went up there, we stayed in a different cabin and nothing happened. My dad's friends said they never found out what was going on there, and I guess the person stopped coming after we left. It was early December, and I was at home this night, spending my day off inside by the fireplace. It was way too cold and snowy out for my liking. I did a bunch of things around the house that needed to get done, but otherwise, it was a relaxing day. I had the news running in the background, listening to how high winds and possible blizzards were to be expected starting tonight. By 5 o'clock, I was already starting to notice it getting worse outside. I sat on the couch and turned on a different channel around 7 o'clock. Though I could hear the wind slamming against the house, and it really did sound like there was a blizzard, I got up and went to the window facing the backyard to see how it looked outside. At first, all I saw was snow rushing to the ground with almost no visibility, but then I saw something else. A figure walking through my backyard. My backyard was pretty big and didn't have a fence, so it wouldn't have been that unexpected if it weren't for the blizzard going on outside. Whoever was out there was just walking at a regular pace, going toward the end of my yard before the snow and darkness took over any sight I had of them. I stayed by the window for a minute, trying to catch one more look and figure out what they were doing, but I didn't see anything. I was honestly scared for them, but also couldn't see why they'd be out there at all. The end of my yard that they were walking to led to a road, but it wouldn't get them anywhere for miles, which was not doable on foot. I went back to the TV, but I still couldn't help thinking about it, and only 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I went over and cracked it open. It was a man in a heavy winter jacket. His nose was bright red, and his face was pale white like he'd been out in the cold for a while. I couldn't know if this was the same person I'd seen in my backyard, but my immediate guess was that it was.
"How can I help you?"
I asked. The man let out a humble smile and spoke through shaking teeth that he was waiting for a ride to pick him up and asked if he could stay in my house for a few minutes to shelter from the cold, just until the ride got here. I took a moment to respond because I actually considered it given the state of the weather. It's easy to say that under no circumstance would you let a random man inside your house, but when they're practically freezing to death on your doorstep and asking for your help, the answer on what to do isn't as black and white. I told him he could wait on my porch, which had an overhang that blocked the snow, and offered to give him an old jacket of mine if he needed it. The man didn't look too happy, but just nodded and went off to the side and sat on the chair I had out there. I closed and locked the door, then went upstairs to grab my old jacket. It was way too big for me and was in horrible condition, but obviously that shouldn't matter in this kind of scenario. I picked it up and walked downstairs, about to unlock the door and open it, but something stopped me just a moment before. I don't know what it was, but it made me hesitate. I leaned over and looked through the peephole. The man was now standing right up against the door with his hand on the handle, like he was preparing to push it open as soon as I unlocked it. I felt my heart rate increasing as I took a couple of steps back and quietly pulled my phone out to dial 911. As I whispered into the phone, I just stared at the door with wide eyes, knowing what was waiting for me on the other side. Once the police said they were on their way, I slowly crept over and looked out again. The man wasn't there. Not on my porch or anywhere in my front yard. He was just gone, like he knew that I had called the police. Nothing else was found that night, and no signs of him ever showed up again. What he would have done if I had opened the door, I can't be sure of, but hopefully he never comes back.